So Michael Brooks went on I-24 News Network. Michael Brooks is a fellow left-wing host. You all should check out his show. He debated the issue of Ilhan Omar with this random English smear merchant, and I loved every second of this. He pummeled him.
David, this was a victory you would acknowledge for progressives and perhaps something of a setback for staunch supporters of Israel.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely the case. But, you know, problematic in a number of ways. And I think perhaps what it was the first sign of is what Bret Stephens called today the Corbynization of the Democratic Party. This is something that the Democratic Party has got to be very careful about, where the radical extremes, fringes of the party start to move towards the center and the mainstream and take control over some of what the party stands for. This is not the historic nature of what the Democratic Party stands for, and I think it's a great shame and tragedy that somebody like Ilhan Omar, who is an overt anti-Semite, can hold the Democratic Party by the kahunas, as they say.
Michael?
Well, I just want to note, first of all, you're always at a bit of a disadvantage when you're up against an accent. So I just want to have that noted in the playing field. But let's be real here. I mean, there was one group that wasn't included in that resolution, and that was the Palestinians as a people, where regular racism and dehumanization towards them is entirely accepted. The reality is that Ilhan Omar is correct on the merits. She's correct on the policy. Saying that she said this comment about dual allegiance is a great leap to begin with. And I have to say, I find it extraordinary that people on the right, who sometimes accurately, by the way, not always, but sometimes accurately, say people on the left, you know, jump to accusations too quickly of various bigotries and read into things. They've been reading into every single thing that the Congresswoman has said from the beginning, most of which are substantive critiques of a sovereign nation state that happens to administer a horrific regime that violates people's rights on a daily basis in Gaza, the West Bank, and even inside Israel in some respects. The new indictment about Netanyahu isn't just garden variety corruption. It involves actually undermining democracy. So I support Ilhan Omar. I don't buy, and I also, in fact, support Corbyn, in fact. And the reality is that these things are going to become debated on the merits, and we're not going to have a false equivalency and actually drag down the profoundly serious issue of anti-Semitism by equating it with all criticism of a sovereign nation state that administers apartheid in reality.
Look, I think this is it's quite astounding to hear somebody sit here and speak like this. I mean, you know, a recent poll came out in the UK that only 24% of British people do not consider Corbyn to be an anti-Semite.
Well, you guys have done an effective job, but let's focus on Omar. You've done a great job.
Let's focus. You know what?
You're not going to do this to Congresswoman Omar.
Focus on her. Don't worry.
Let's do that. Let me try to do that. Let's try to do this, and let me set this up. Let's focus on Omar.
Because this is important. This is really important.
And one of the issues, David, that she has argued is, and look, we can agree that maybe she was sloppy, maybe she got too close to an anti-Semitic trope, but as far as the actual policy is concerned, you mentioned a minute ago that the Democrats are engaged in something radical. Is it radical to criticize the Netanyahu government in Israel for the settlement policy in the West Bank?
Let's be clear about something, okay? And this is what's incredibly disingenuous about what you've just heard here. That is absolutely not what she is being accused of by people on the right and by members of her own party, the leadership of her own party. She is somebody who has accused Israel of hypnotizing the world.
That
has
was
accused supporters, has accused
which
supporters.
She has already backtracked
Excuse me, I let you speak.
Right, don't touch
let me finish, please.
Sure.
Excuse me. She has accused supporters of the Jewish state of being motivated by money. And she has
every lobby plays a role in politics. That's reality.
The largest pro-Israel Jewish organization.
Right, and the House passed a resolution condemning her for that. But again, to my question, is it radical to criticize the Netanyahu government for their settlement policy in the West Bank?
That's not what this discussion is about.
That's absolutely what this discussion is about.
Is it radical? It's not.
This discussion is about the role of lobbies.
But that is not what this discussion is about. That's not what Ilhan Omar is being accused of. That's not what she's being criticized before.
This discussion is about money in politics. This discussion is about foreign policy in the Middle East. Also, Ilhan Omar has been a robust critic of Saudi Arabia. She said people should boycott the Hajj because of Saudi Arabia's conduct. The reality is that the old stagnant frames of both the sort of Saudi and Israeli consensus is being undermined and disrupted and critiqued in a robust way, which is oriented on global human rights standards and not, in fact, ethnocentric identity politics, which is a problem wherever it manifests. And the smearing of her, the lies about her, the disgusting, grotesque display against her you just saw is only going to strengthen people's commitment.
But can you understand why a lot of people who support Israel, they may criticize the Netanyahu government, feel that Israel constantly gets singled out by people on the Democratic left in a way that is unfair compared to the rest of the world?
So in terms of reality, let's break this down. Number one, there is... First of all, if Israel wants to be held to a higher standard than a place like Saudi Arabia, it's going to be held to a higher standard. When people say, well, why don't you complain about the Saudis? First of all, everybody does, and the Saudis at least don't have any pretensions that they're anything other than a brutal theocracy and monarchy. The Israelis have maintained a position of being the only democracy in the Middle East, while they have maintained an occupation of another group of people for over 40 years and regularly killed and bombed civilians. And the second standard is that, look, again, in terms of reality, Israel has not only serious and profound and systemic problems, which even poses a threat in some respects to our security, but like Egypt, we happen to fund them greatly. And so therefore, it is a different relationship. But you will find that those who criticize Israel in good faith, as many Jewish activists do, of course, are going to be actually the same people, as you see with Omar, who are questioning the relationship with the Gulf monarchies and other areas of dysfunction in Middle East policy that will never be wrong, no matter how many lies and smears people throw at her.
David?
You know, we can have a long discussion about Middle East policy, but what you have seen tonight is disingenuity at the highest level.
I agree.
This is not what this discussion is about. This is not what Ilhan Omar is being accused of. Please don't interrupt. I let you speak. I let you speak. Please don't interrupt.
And focus on policy.
Please don't interrupt.
Focus on
policy.
This
is about a person who has come into the United States Congress and repeated, as a repeat offender, bigoted tropes against the Jewish community. She's been called out from it across the board, from within the Jewish community, from within her own party. And the concern is...
people who agree with you, and look, there are plenty of people who do agree with you and may say that, you know, what she did was unconscionable, but by playing it out the way it did, by hitting back so hard at Ilhan Omar, who doesn't seem like any sort of threat to Israel or people who support Israel, the Israeli right has essentially lifted her stature. She has more power now than she did a week ago.
But also, let's be clear,
most people about the Israeli right, right? The criticism here is coming from across the political spectrum, and it's a very specific criticism. This is not criticism about discussion of Israel. It's criticism about repeating anti-Semitic tropes. And that's the charge of Jew loyalty. That's the charge of being influenced by
which we don't
money,
accept that premise.
Right? And that's the charge of Israel hypnotizing the world.
And every single
These are the kind of tropes that you saw in Nazi propaganda.
Every single person is influenced by money from every single lobby. There's no magical exemption with AIPAC, and she's right.
Well done by Michael Brooks. Very well done by Michael Brooks. This is something we've been saying for a while. The left has fighters. The left has teeth. Let us use them. Because you have to realize that there was a generation of Fox News and Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity and talk radio really framing the discussion and just driving the discourse. And they drag that Overton window so far to the right that even, you know, like a mild milquetoast centrist like Alan Colmes was viewed as Che Guevara. And Alan Colmes would have to go in there and like, I 25% agree with Hannity, but I 75% disagree, and let me politely explain what I'm talking about and take forever to get to my point. And it ain't like that anymore, man. The era has totally changed. We're in a new era of politics. We're in an anti-corruption era. We're in a pro-populist era. We're in an era where the left pulls no punches, fights back, has clear policy goals, and also is not willing to play games with any bullshit smears. what happened to Ilhan Omar 100% is a smear campaign. I mean, she literally said it's all about the Benjamins, talking about AIPAC and how they buy influence in Washington, D.C., and they get politicians to do the bidding of the Israeli government. That's not even controversial. That's objectively true. And the idea that she singles out Israel is just false. As Michael Brooks pointed out there, she always goes after Saudi Arabia. She always goes after them. You know, oh, why don't you go to boycott Saudi Arabia? She has. She has. So is she Islamophobic? So they're smearing her. And they've doubled down on it, and they've tripled down on it, and now we have somebody fighting back. And also, by the way, he happens to have a Jewish background. I don't know if he's still, practicing in terms of religion. My guess would be he's just not religious, but, he's Jewish. And he's stepping up and saying, no, this is nonsense. And by the way, some of the strongest defenders of Ilhan Omar that I've seen, people who are, from a Jewish background, Glenn Greenwald, for example, Katie Halper, Michael Brooks, and many others. So that was awesome. He absolutely nailed his ass to the wall. And it's refreshing to see, finally, people fight back, and now this dumb narrative, which has been universally accepted in corporate media in the U.S. and in mainstream politics in the U.S., this dumb narrative being busted up once and for all, and people finally hearing out the other side, which happens to be true.